Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. I'm shooting these on Wednesday again just because of the way my schedule has fallen this week, but it looks like there's a bunch of questions, so let's jump in and see what we got. First up, Arkanoid wanted to continue the conversation about magnetically shielded speakers and asked the very fair question of, have I ever looked into what it would take to shield speakers ourselves? And yes, I put quite a bit of time into this, and I even did the silly things like lining it with foil and all of that stuff just to see if it made any difference. And the answer is no, because this is all about magnetism. So you would only be able to get a magnet to go over the magnet on the back of the speaker to counteract the magnetic field, which is exactly what shielded speakers are. If you look at them, they have like a full metal looking magnet over the back of it to counteract that effect. And the answer is yes, you could absolutely do that, but there's a couple of problems. First, you're going to have to find the type of magnet that would fit exactly over the back of your speaker, which is totally doable if you have access to a bunch of different parts. You had mentioned something like buying a steel pipe cap large enough to fit over the magnet. Yeah, but then you'd have to magnetize the pipe cap or put another magnet on the end of that. So all of that stuff is doable, but the real problem is when you buy speakers that are a little more on the inexpensive side. And I know that word just pisses everybody off because to an audiophile, inexpensive is thousands, and to your average person, inexpensive is $100 or something. But for me, I like those ELAC speakers so much. I think they're great. You get them right on Amazon, but they're a couple hundred for a set. But if you pop those open to try to add some magnets to the back, you're going to have to reseal the wood. And a lot of times the way these speakers are able to sound the way they are is because of the exact manufacturing process, the way everything kind of goes together. So you could take it apart and add the shielding and then put it all back together and glue it, and maybe it'll sound identical. Maybe it'll sound better, or maybe it'll sound terrible and you've just destroyed your speakers. So for me personally, unless it was a scenario of you had amazing speakers that you absolutely loved and maybe you could unbolt the back of them, a lot of speakers are built that way, sure, give it a try. But if you have to crack open your speakers that are glued together in order to make that happen, I would personally never do that. But I also am terrible with a saw. So I know a lot of people who could basically be carpenters who could be artists, let's just put it that way, who could probably crack open the back of a speaker, do what they need to do and put it together and have it look factory. I am not that person. I would look like an elementary school science project or wood shop or whatever if I tried to do that. So I guess that was a really long way of saying, yeah, I've looked into it, and in almost all cases, it's just not worth it to me. But if it is worth it to you, the number one thing you have to remember is just to find the counteracting magnet size to fit right over the back of yours, and then just run the same basic tests. Wave the speaker in front of your CRT and see what happens, and it should be fine. But it's a bunch of work, and finding the correct parts, I think, is going to be the hardest part, even if you know somebody that's good at taking speakers apart, or if yours have bolts in the back or something like that. So if you end up doing it, let us know how you make out with it. But yeah, for me personally, it's definitely not something I'm going to do. Last week, I asked Mark Elliott how much it cost to bring the Bang & Olufsen CRT back to their service center, and they said the price up to now is, converted from British pounds to dollars, around $340, which is for collection and return of TV and for full inspection and clean. But they've yet to get the bill for parts and labor and calibration, which might make us all shiver and shudder. Let's hope they have mercy on my soul. I've got a feeling it's going to come back fully restored and I'm going to have to sell my house. It's actually my fault. Mark watched a video of mine and now their B&O is at B&O, which is an exercise known to break souls. That is very funny. So that's not terrible. I'm expecting this to be pretty expensive, but if it's fully refurbished and the caps are done and everything's calibrated, you probably got at least a decade on it. But since it's not going to be a daily driver TV like it would have been, you might have 20, 30 years on it. So if it's something that matters to you, it's a great investment. And I'm also kind of curious to see what the final price is. Also, Esteron said they also have an AV9000, and included from it was when they got it, that was, sorry, excuse me. Included with it was a manual as well as some official B&O service card with a date of late 2015. The previous owner was such a madman that he still used this TV as his bedroom TV and had it completely serviced 16 years after it first left the factory. Almost couldn't believe it when they read the service date. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that also just goes to show you, right? If a piece of equipment is that good, there's really not much of a need to upgrade. And I distinctly remember, I'm going way off topic here, but I distinctly remember in the early 2000s ish, a friend of mine's father had, I believe it was a Sony HD CRT. I can't remember if it was the Sony or the Samsung, but it was really nice. And remember, at that time, everything was still standard definition. The very few HD things that were being broadcast looked great, but there wasn't a lot of them. Blu-ray wasn't I don't even think it was a standard yet. I don't think it was still in the pre-talks arguing with HD DVD. And I thought that was amazing, but this guy was just enamored with flat panel TVs. He loved it. So he went to move the big TV outside to bring it to a different room with his friend, and they dropped it down the flight of stairs and it smashed, which part of me thinks my friend's dad may have dropped it on purpose so he could convince his family he needed to buy a flat panel. And they went out and bought a flat panel, and he was so proud of it. And I just didn't have the heart to tell him that the HD CRT looked infinitely better than the first round of flat panels that you get. And it was a tiny bit more expensive too, because these were all really expensive back in the day. So, if something is a really good piece of equipment and you're able to recognize the differences, I would totally keep it for a lot longer. Great example are like CRT projectors and stuff like that, BVMs. So, yeah, I completely and totally believe that somebody would have a TV that they bought for a ton of money and think, this thing's awesome, I want to keep it. Let me just have it serviced rather than buy one of those flat panels. Because 2015, you could still get some amazing plasmas and some decent LCDs, but I don't know, for if you got a TV that works, and why not, right? But yeah, thanks for both of you for chiming in. Those were fun stories. Next up, Heinrich wanted to chime in on the question someone asked about wireless PlayStation 2 controllers. As far as they know, all buttons on the PS2 controller, even the D-pad, are pressure sensitive. Some games like Metal Gear Solid 3 use this functionality. The only wireless controller solution for this they could come up with for their own setup is to use a DualShock 3 controller in conjunction with a Brook PS2 adapter. It works great, except for the issue that they haven't managed to pair two DS3 controllers to two Brook adapters in their PS2, but they haven't given up on that part. So thank you for chiming in, and also thank you to everybody in the comments who took the time to chime in. Seriously, a couple of those options I had completely forgotten about, and there were some that I didn't even know about, and I think that those are all good options. But I like that one. I like the DualShock 3 with the Brook adapter. I think keeping it Sony, it's going to make it feel as stock as possible. But there is a Retro Fighters controller coming out that's aiming to do the same thing, but it's not even in pre-order yet. So I don't know what the features are, if everything's pressure sensitive or not. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. But thanks to you, Heinrich, and everybody else who chimed in on that, because there were some really good tips there for people who wanted PS2 controllers wirelessly. And I'm not sure if there's one perfect solution, but I do think that, using the DualShock 3 and higher would probably be a great solution. Maybe it's not perfect, but certainly good enough. Oh, and speaking of Rob's question from last week about the PS2 controllers, Rob wanted to clarify, while they love the DualSense controller, the triggers are analog. They're looking for something a little more authentic to the PS1, something with digital L2 and R2 buttons. While the OEM non-analog controllers with an 8-bit DOM mod kit work, there isn't anything out there for the OEM DualShock with the analog sticks. Given the limited amount of titles that use them or force feedback, they're thinking their options are quite limited. This seems to happen with N64 controllers too, where they'll use analog triggers for the Z button. To them, that totally takes them out of the game or experience. Something they hope this new 8-bit DOM 3D controller corrects if it ever comes out. For the most part, the Tribute 64 works for this. Yeah, I still got no options whatsoever then for you. The only thing you could really think about doing is trying to have some kind of, I thought there was some device that you could plug it into that would be wireless. So basically you plug it into a box and then there's also a receiver at the PlayStation. But I don't remember how old that was. I don't know how much latency that is. And I don't think that's a modern solution that people swear by. Maybe there is one though. But yeah, I don't know. If anybody knows that very specific scenario, maybe, chime in to let Rob know. But I think that's going to be a tough one to find. And honestly, for situations like that, as much as this answer is probably going to annoy the hell out of you, a PlayStation controller extension cord might just be the best way to do it. Because as long as the connection is safe, and to be honest, if it's even slightly bit weird, plug in the extension cable and then wrap like painter's tape around it to make sure it stays solid. But as long as the connection's there, everything else is going to work fine. As long as the connection is correct and as long as all of the pins are wired correctly to make sure that all the functions work. But you're not going to add latency. You'd have to have like a mile's worth of cable to start adding latency. So I think I would just try that, and if it works, that might just be a super cheap way to get around this. And eventually, if other wireless controllers are released, you could do that as well. But let me know what you think, and I'll see if any of the stores I rely on have the extension cords, and I'll leave links for them. If not, just find the cheapest possible thing you can and hope for the best. Next up, Ken Bakes recently started the process to recap their old consoles. They consider their experience level pretty low, only having done work like installing an X station and making OG Xbox component cables and reflowing cold solder joints by following some online tutorials. However, they've yet to find clear resources that point them to proper safety considerations when attempting recaps on PSUs or other higher rated components. Admittedly, they may not have looked deep enough. Do I have any recommendations or any videos, tutorials, or one-on-ones that demonstrate proper safety considerations in discharge before attempting such work? No, but it's the same as all electronic work in that if you're worried about ESD, especially like if you're in a room where you walk around and you touch something and you spark, without a doubt, get a ESD mat, get one of those bracelets that snaps into it, and then I think those plug right into the wall, into the ones I've seen, there's many different types, but the ones that I had for a while, there was the 3-prong AC connector, and the 2 power prongs were just dummy plastic plugs to keep it in place, and it grounded into the wall, which is a good thing. So that way, any static discharge you have can go through that and not into the components that you're using. That said, if you don't have a very high static area and you've been doing electronics work for like 30 years, your brain automatically touches metal before you touch anything on the board. And that is not as good as an anti-static solution. I'm sure my EE friends are already losing their minds when I say that. But I'm just saying, in the context of like, I want to recap 2 or 3 consoles, you might not need to go buy all that extra equipment if you're really careful. But if you do have concerns for safety, and especially if you're in a room that you're always sparking yourself, or maybe it's just the time of year or whatever, getting an ESD mat and one of those wrist things is absolutely the perfect thing to do for safety. Also, the only other things to remember is how to do cap replacements. Don't use the twist off method unless there's absolutely no other way possible, which it's almost never the case. Tito from Macho Nacho Productions did a video a while back showing all the different ways to remove capacitors that he uses in his videos, and they're all good except for the twist off method. I think for me personally, the ones that, through hole, obviously you would just use a solder sucker, like a desoldering gun, but for surface mount caps, the best way to do it is a really good pair of solder tweezers, but those are very expensive, and the cheap ones are complete garbage. I can tell you from experience. If you're curious what it's like to buy one for 20 bucks, fine, but don't expect real performance out of it. You need to spend real good money. But just using tweezers and just doing one side at a time in most cases, I think is my favorite method. I don't think I've ever used twist off, and the cut off method still kind of makes me nervous because you're still putting pressure on the pins on the motherboard, but sometimes that is the best way to go about doing it. So I'll see if I could find that video from Tito if you want tips. And like Tito says many times in that video and in others, just avoid the twist off unless you absolutely don't have another option. But yeah, I think that's basically it for safety tips for that stuff. But if anybody else has any other suggestions or something I'm forgetting, please chime in the comments. Next up, Dan Lavoie wants to know what I would recommend for converting a component YPbPr signal to a composite video signal. Most of their consoles are wired up for component output, but they recently curb-picked a CRT that only has composite inputs, and they're wondering if there's a good way to send a signal to that TV without too much rewiring. So I'm going to skip to the end and say it's going to be infinitely cheaper for you to just pick up composite video cables for your consoles and direct plug them whenever you go about doing it that way. So let's just say, hypothetically, you have a really nice setup with everything wired up, and you're going into a scaler, into a flat panel. Buy yourself like a triad power supply with a bunch of different pigtails, and buy yourself a couple of composite cables, and then you could just unplug your consoles one at a time to use on your CRT. That is not the question you asked, but I wanted to start with that because that is by far the easiest solution. But let me back up and explain a little bit why. First of all, when you go from signals like RGB down to composite, like is done in most consoles, you need a lot more signals than just red, green, blue, and sync. You need things to make sure that all of the color information is synced together as well. And that's why when you have these generic converters that go from RGB to S-video and composite, S-video mostly looks okay. It's not as good as direct from a console, but it's fine. But composite always looks crazy unless you get the one that's been delayed over a year that has the variable potential or variable capacitor in there that allows you to dial in the right color frequency. And it works like a clock. So you basically just turn it until you get the best look and leave it in that spot. So you don't have to just sit there spinning it forever. However, that converter is RGB in. So for you to convert component video to composite. So let's go back to that analogy where you have everything wired into a G-comp switch and you have 8 consoles, all component video. You would just take that second output of the G-comp and you would go into a RetroTink comp to RGB. Then you would, which is a little less than $100. Then you would go from there into this converter, which is cheaper than that, definitely. And then you would go into your CRT. So you'd spend more money than you would just getting a couple of cheap composite cables and 1 or 2 power supplies. And on top of that, it's all of this stuff that you have wired in. Now, if you're like me and many of the other people in the scene that are constantly tinkering with stuff, that's totally fine because now you also have 2 devices that you would most likely use at another time for something else. So cool, now you just have more tools to use. But if you just want a solution that works, I still think going back to the first thing I said is probably going to be the easiest. And, I hope that more devices like this start to come out, but we're still waiting on the one that got delayed from last year. So who knows how long it would take to have a component video version of that. However, in this scenario, light guns should still work if you wanted them to. But yeah, I would definitely, at least for the short term, say just get some cheap composite cables, unshielded garbage, knowing that you're going to have some audio buzz and stuff like that, or dig out the originals if you still have them and just try to do it that way. And if you have any other questions or anything else that you want me to point you in the right direction, please let me know. But it's certainly going to be a lot easier than dealing with anything else, at least today. Maybe we'll get better converters in the future, because I do think there are a lot of people exactly like you that have a fully wired, really nice setup, but just pick up a CRT and just want to plug it in. And if the composite video isn't quite as good as directly from the console, but not all crazy like the generic converters, fine, great. Turn the variable cap till it looks okay, and then good. You're good to go until you switch consoles. So I'll keep everybody updated when that's released, but that's the unfortunate answer for now. Next up, Castlemania Ryan wants to know if it's safe to use a Bluetooth transmitter for audio with a PVM, and if so, do I have any recommendations? So, to be specific, Ryan means taking the red and white audio from something like an HD Retrovision cable and connecting those to a transmitter to send to Bluetooth speakers. This would force the transmitter to be very close to the PVM. Well, in this scenario, let's just assume that the speakers are fully magnetically shielded or in the corners of your room away from the CRT. But good question. No, there should not be any issue whatsoever. Bluetooth is just another 2.4 gigahertz wireless signal. So you would have the same caveats as if you have a Bluetooth audio transmitter a couple of feet away from a Bluetooth controller. You might have some weird latency issues or pops or something like that, but it's not super common to have that stuff happen. It's just always a possibility. But as far as interference with the PVM or any CRT, no, I don't think I would worry about that. Now, I'm not an expert in, Bluetooth wireless protocols, so if anybody out there is and I'm missing something, please let me know. But it's not like a magnetic field that would interfere with the CRT's magnetic field. It's just another wireless signal like your router, your phone, everything else. So it should be fine. But once again, assuming the speakers are either safely distant from the CRT or also magnetically shielded. Now, what you would want to worry about is Bluetooth audio delay, which is absolutely a real issue. And before anybody rolls their eyes, this isn't like this, well, my controller has 6 milliseconds of lag and, your controller has 3, so yours is better. No, they're both almost 0 from a player's point of view. When you're talking about Bluetooth audio, that would be a noticeable difference in latency. So you could see somebody's voice coming in after their mouth is moving type of thing. And not all of them are like that, but some are. So you'd either have to get ones that are, labeled for gaming, low latency, or just buy one from a store that takes returns, and, hopefully you'd be able to buy one that's labeled correctly. But great question. But I think latency is going to be real world latency, like actual measurable by your own eyes and ears latency, is going to be a much bigger issue than any kind of wireless interference. So you would just have to kind of try it and see. Next up, Dustin Madison wants to know if there's any YouTube channels I'd recommend for seriously learning electronic skills like soldering or even PCB design. Yeah, so definitely Voltar and Tito's channels, especially because they focus on the stuff that we all do. So if you're worried about how to recap a Super Nintendo or something like that, they have videos that show exactly that. So that's where I would start. Also, EEV blog, that's a great YouTube channel for a lot of stuff related to this. But on the PCB design side, I don't know, and I would love to get recommendations from anybody else. And I think I'm 95% sure that if you put a link to a YouTube video in the YouTube comments, that will not get deleted. Just links to anything else would. So if any of my fellow nerds want to help me try this experiment, if you have a good video on PCB design, I think there's some out there for KiCad stuff and things like that, but maybe just put 2 comments. Put one comment that says search for video labeled, and put another comment with here's the link, and we'll see if the link gets deleted or not. I always love a good nerd test. Also, good luck this weekend on the comedy show. I'll make sure to listen to that podcast later on and see. And yeah, hopefully have a good time. Next up, Pro Nerdy wanted to follow up on the conversation about the tearing issue when they turn on boost mode with their LG C3 OLED and 720p sources. They did all of the proper testing that you would think of, swapped out cables with known good ones, tried different sources, did every update on their TV since they got it, and there's no change. It just still has screen tearing when 720p 60 sources are inputted with boost mode on. Does not happen with 1080p sources in boost mode, doesn't happen with 720p 60 with boost mode off. So it just seems like a glitch in that exact scenario. C3 OLED, 720p 60, boost mode on. So thank you for doing all the proper nerding, because that's good info for everybody else that has that TV that might be running into the same issue. Luckily, those TVs are still very fast, especially when you compare them to the, a decade ago's TVs, 2015, 2016 OLEDs. Those were all like 2-3 frames of latency. So it's pretty good that at least at this point with it. So thank you for following up, and that's good to know. Also, they wanted to know if I had any plans to do an interview or podcast with the developer Infidelity, who does the NES to SNES conversions. And I haven't asked them yet. I plan on it at some point, but I have been so crazy busy the past year. Has been kind of nuts. Like, I'm surprised I haven't gone all grain. I'm 400 pounds yet. Luckily, neither of those things happened. But I would love to do that. But there's also a long list of people that I've been talking to saying, we should do this. And then just things fall apart. So whenever it all kind of falls into place, I would love to go back to doing, I'd like to go back to doing weekly podcasts. It's probably too much for the channel and too much content to just keep throwing out there. But I just really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed it to the point where I would very often feel guilty after the podcast recording was over, going, wow, nobody's going to want to hear this. This is just me asking the questions I was curious about. And some of those were the best ones and had the most views and the best feedback. So I still get that weird guilt whenever I just sink in and have an awesome conversation with somebody and don't even really think, like, it takes me a while to remember, like, oh yeah, you're supposed to be doing a podcast, ask more questions. But so yeah, I like it. And, I hope other people like it, and I hope other people still keep giving feedback. I know I talk too much, but I'm trying my best. That's never gonna get so much better. But yeah, I would love to. And there's a lot of other people I'd love to talk to. And there's also a lot of people that do these Q&As that I think would make a great conversation to have one day. But I got to catch up with all the crazy backlogs I have. And there are 2 videos I'm working on now, one of which is kind of time sensitive, so I want to make sure to get that one ready. And the next one is super nerdy, and I just really can't wait to dig into it. And it'll be helpful for everybody who wants those weird scenarios that I like to work on. So we'll see. Those are some very vague teasers, but hopefully in the next 2 weeks, you're going to get one of the videos, and then probably within another month, you'll get the second. But those are kind of my priority outside of the day-to-day stuff for RetroRGB, because I think those are going to be pretty fun and get some good info out there for people. So maybe after that I could jump back into doing podcasts. Like, I have one scheduled this week, but that's more of a tech follow-up. Y'all will see this weekend. But anyway, thanks for the question, or thanks for following up, Pro Nerdy, and thanks for the question as well. Well, that's it for this week. The questions were only on Patreon, which happens from time to time because that's just where the majority of people support. But anybody who supports on any platform is welcome to ask whatever question you have. Just please ask them in the latest Q&A post, because the way the services work, I can't really figure out what's a new question on an old post. Plus, as you saw here today, I like just scrolling through and asking questions as if we were hanging out at an expo somewhere, just laid back and relaxed and just kind of having a conversation. So any question you'd like, fire away. And if for whatever reason I don't answer your question, it's almost always because it came in after I was done recording, but before I had a chance to upload it. So maybe you asked the question and then the video pops up. So it just, I never even saw it. Also, there's the rare occasion where I accidentally delete one of the files in editing, and so that gets lost, which that hasn't happened in a long time, but that does happen. So if basically what I'm trying to say is I'm never purposely skipping questions. It's just always an accident. And let me know if that happens, if you want me to re-ask or re-answer it the following week, or if you just want the answer, you could always DM me. But enough rambling. Thank you to all of you for supporting in absolutely any way, because it really is you who's keeping this all going. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next week.